Frank Delaney sat in his kitchen, arms folded across the table that still bore faint scratches from the toy trucks his grandson used to crash into cereal bowls. The quiet buzz of the refrigerator was the only sound. The day was July 3rd, and outside, the sun was just beginning to lower over Spokane, casting long slants of gold across the garage and garden. Every year for 17 years, this evening would be one of joyful anticipation. Frank would be on the road early in the morning, a cooler in the trunk filled with potato salad, homemade burgers, sparklers for the kids. He'd arrive early to help Matt set up chairs, hang flags, and check the propane tank on the grill. Lauren would wave from the kitchen window, her mouth curved in polite, practiced gratitude. Every year. Without fail. But this year, there was no call. No text. No little, "Hey Dad, excited to see you," from Matt. Frank had checked his phone 5 times already. 6. Then it buzzed. It was a text from Lauren. "Hey Frank, just a heads up, we're keeping it small this year. My parents are flying in and, we don't think it's right you come this time. Hope you understand." The air in the room thickened. He read it again. "Don't think it's right you come." Not because he was sick. Not because they were out of town. Because it wasn't right. Frank's gaze drifted out the window to the smoker he had sanded just last week, and to the flagpole he'd built in the garage from red oak. A custom piece with brass fittings, he hadn't even finished staining it yet. It was supposed to be his gift. His contribution to the celebration. He was going to raise the flag with his grandkids, teach them to fold it properly, tell them about the day their great-grandfather came home from the war. But none of that would happen now. He reached for his glass. The iced tea had long since gone warm. The condensation ring it left on the table lingered longer than the invitation that never came. He stood slowly, joints clicking in protest. The walls around him, lined with photos of family vacations, birthdays, and barbecues, felt like silent witnesses. Evidence of a presence now deemed inconvenient. Frank walked into the garage. The smell of sawdust and oil still clung to the air. Tools in perfect order. Rags folded neatly. The flagpole sat in the corner, leaning against the workbench. He stared at it. Then, without a word, he turned and walked to the filing cabinet near the back wall. From the bottom drawer, he pulled out a folder. Its tab read, "Matt and Lauren." Inside were receipts, contracts, bank statements, and copies of checks. Pages and pages of proof. Proof of a father's love. Proof of a son's comfort. Proof of a family's forgetfulness. He placed the folder on the workbench. A breeze drifted in through the open side door, rustling the first page. It was a wire transfer receipt. $12,000. Down payment for the house Lauren now decorated with bunting and fairy lights for a party he wasn't welcome at. Frank didn't raise his voice. Didn't curse. He just pulled out a chair, sat down, and began sorting. Tomorrow was Independence Day. And this year, Frank would finally declare his own. Frank Delaney never saw himself as extraordinary. He wasn't the kind of man who needed attention, or applause. He found satisfaction in finished edges, straight lines, and things that didn't need to be said. For 35 years, he ran a small but respected contracting business in Spokane. Nothing fancy, kitchens, porches, siding, some custom cabinetry. Word of mouth kept him busy. When his wife, Nora, passed after a short, cruel illness, Frank's life contracted to a quiet rhythm. Work. Home. Yard. Phone calls with Matt, sometimes. But everything softened. Until the day Matt called about the new house. "Dad, it's a bit of a stretch, but it's the kind of place we could grow into." Lauren wanted something with character. Fixer-upper charm, she called it. Translation, expensive renovations. Frank offered to take a look. The place had good bones but sagging joists, cracked tile, and a furnace older than Matt. Still, Frank saw what his son saw, potential. He also saw what Matt and Lauren didn't, the debt that would follow them for years. So, quietly, Frank offered help. "I've got some savings. I can spot you the down payment," he said, like it was a casual offer, not a sacrifice. "Just until you're on your feet." Matt resisted, barely. Lauren smiled, tight-lipped. That would be generous. Frank withdrew from his retirement early. Paid penalties he didn't mention. Wrote the check. And that was just the beginning. Over the next 2 years, Frank became more than a father. He was the project manager, laborer, designer, babysitter, and lender. He tore out walls, installed recessed lighting, retiled the bathrooms, landscaped the front yard. He worked until his knees ached and his hands trembled. But he told himself it was worth it, to keep Matt stable, to give his grandchildren something better than what he and Nora had started with. When Lauren complained about the outdated kitchen, Frank didn't just listen. He pulled out a notepad. He designed a new layout, drove to the hardware store, and paid for the granite countertops himself. The $14,000 bill was quietly added to his folder. When the furnace gave out during a particularly bitter February, Frank coordinated the replacement over 2 days, skipping his own annual physical to get it done. Another $7,500 on his tab. Every birthday party, every holiday gathering, it was Frank who arrived early, stayed late, fixed the screen door, cleaned the gutters, rehung shelves. He never sent a bill. Never asked for thanks. The grandchildren adored him. Grace, the youngest, once said, "Grandpa's the one who fixes everything." And for Frank, that was enough. Lauren's praise was more distant. She would smile, say, "Oh, thank goodness you were here, Frank," and then disappear into another room. She never asked about his life, his health, his home. But Frank chalked it up to personality. She came from a different world. Her parents were retired realtors who summered in Carmel and hosted wine tastings on their back patio. They spoke in crisp tones, valued tasteful boundaries, and complimented Frank's work ethic like he was the gardener. He never fit in with them. And maybe that was fine. He wasn't trying to. But over the years, he began to notice a shift. Lauren stopped calling him Dad. She started saying, "Your father," when talking to Matt. When guests came over, Frank was introduced less as family, more as Matt's father. "He helped us with the porch," as if he were the contractor who happened to be related. And Matt. Matt was always too tired, too distracted to notice. "You're the best, Dad," he'd say during holidays. "We couldn't have done it without you." Then the next day, he'd vanish back into work. Frank kept giving. Kept showing up. Kept waiting for the day it would click, and Matt would look at him not just as free labor, not just as a safety net, but as a father whose life had been poured into theirs. That day never came. But July 4th always had. Every year. Without fail. Until this one. The phrase kept echoing in his mind. "You don't really fit the atmosphere." Frank rolled it around in his head like a splinter in his mouth. He imagined Lauren typing it with her perfectly manicured fingers, probably sitting beside her mother in that sunlit living room he'd installed the windows for. Her parents, Evelyn and Charles, would be arriving from Connecticut in time for the barbecue. They liked civilized gatherings, as Evelyn once called them. Tablecloths, matching drinkware, conversation about gallery exhibits and the market. Frank had been to enough of these things to understand how he was seen. A kind man. Hard-working. Quiet. But rough around the edges. A relic. Something you acknowledge, maybe thank once in a while, but not something you showcase, not when your curated world of prestige is watching. He imagined Lauren's conversation with Matt. "He's sweet," she might have said, "but he doesn't mesh." And Matt? Frank could hear his sigh. Could see him run a hand through his hair like he always did when he wanted to dodge discomfort. "I'll talk to him," he probably mumbled. But he hadn't. He hadn't even been the one to send the message. That stung more than the words. Frank wasn't naive. He knew his place had been shifting slowly. Each year he was thanked a little less. Each birthday he was needed a little less. Each visit he was included a little less. But this was different. This was a line. Drawn. Clear. Permanent. He thought of the sparklers he'd bought. The kids loved them, Grace, especially. She'd run in loops, waving fire like magic, screaming, "Look, Grandpa," over and over. Frank kept a pack in the garage year-round, just in case. He thought of the flagpole. The one he'd been building for weeks. He'd imagined planting it in their yard as a surprise. It was custom, tall, elegant, classic. He'd stained it 3 times. Bought brass hardware because he remembered Lauren once saying how cheap things looked under daylight. The irony was thick now. It was meant to be a gift. A contribution. A symbol of family pride, of continuity. Of freedom. Instead, he'd been disinvited from the very holiday that honored freedom. They hadn't said he'd done something wrong. They hadn't said he'd offended anyone. They just decided, he didn't belong. That night, he sat in his garage. The fluorescent bulb above buzzed slightly, casting everything in a cold wash of blue. Frank sat at his workbench, hands still, folder open. He reviewed the contents, line by line. $12,000 down payment, bank transfer, dated July 2018. $3,800 kitchen tile order, Home Renovators LLC. $14,300 for counters and appliances, mostly out of pocket. $700 per month for 18 months when Matt hit a rough patch at work. Thousands more in materials, lumber, paint, fixtures, mulch, stain, hardware. Receipts all marked with his name. Not a single reimbursement. Not once. He added them up again, though he knew the number by heart. It sat heavy on his chest. He flipped through photos printed on glossy paper, Grace with frosting on her chin, perched on his lap, Matt grilling at the backyard party 2 summers ago, wearing the #OneDad apron Frank had bought him, Lauren sipping wine on the porch he had built with his own hands. Each image, a love letter. Each image, now a wound. He didn't cry. He simply sat, one hand resting on the folder, the other on the flagpole he hadn't yet finished. When the phone rang, he let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Matt. Frank answered on the 4th ring. "Dad, hey." There was a pause. Frank said nothing. I heard from Lauren you saw the message." Still silence. "It's not that we don't want you there, it's just complicated. Her parents are particular. You know how they are." Frank said, "You didn't even tell me yourself." Matt exhaled. "I didn't want to make it a big thing. It's just 1 year." "No, son," Frank said softly. "It's not just 1 year. It's all the years that made this one possible." Matt went quiet. Frank didn't fill the silence. "I'm sorry, Dad. We didn't mean to hurt you." But they had. They just didn't think he'd notice. Frank didn't sleep much that night. He moved from room to room, not with purpose, but like someone haunted. The hallway light buzzed faintly as he passed Nora's photo on the wall. She was smiling, one hand tucked under her chin, her eyes still full of the belief that family was everything. That sacrifice meant something. He whispered to the photo, "I thought I did it right." The house creaked around him. Old wood, like old bones, tired but still standing. At the kitchen table, he opened his notebook. The kind with wide-ruled pages, a blue vinyl cover, and Nora's cursive still faintly visible on the inside cover, grocery list, Sunday. He turned to a blank page and began writing, not a letter, not a plan, just numbers. $12,000, down payment. $14,300, kitchen renovations. $3,000, bathroom work. $2,800 per month x 18 months, mortgage help. $1,200, backyard furniture. $1,000, Christmases, gifts, unexpected bills. The list grew. As he reached the bottom of the page, his hand began to tremble. Not from age. From finality. Frank never kept score, not until the game was clearly over. And now it was. There was nothing left to earn, no version of himself that could be accepted inside that home. He made his way to the garage again, pulled a lawn chair from the shelf, and unfolded it in the middle of the room. He sat, facing the flagpole he had built for them. The smooth, hand-sanded surface caught the light like a quiet accusation. It leaned, unfinished, against the wall. Just like him. He sat there until the first light of morning crept under the garage door. The faint chirp of birds outside, the echo of sprinklers ticking across the neighbor's lawn. Sounds that usually signaled beginnings. But for Frank, they marked something else. The end of hoping. He went back inside, made coffee he didn't drink, and stared at the empty chair across the table. Nora's chair. She used to sit there and talk to him about everything, about Matt's grades, her worries about Lauren, the grandkids' quirks, her quiet dream to visit the coast one more time. That chair had been a sounding board, a mirror. Now it was just an absence. Frank pulled a photo from the fridge, one of Grace and Henry sitting in his lap last 4th of July, waving flags, all three of them laughing so hard their eyes squinted shut. He remembered the moment. The smell of grilled onions, the weight of Grace's arm around his neck, Henry pressing sparklers into his hand with delight. That photo belonged in a frame. Instead, it was pinned to the fridge door, slowly curling at the edges. Like everything else. At noon, Matt texted again. "Dad, can we talk later? Lauren feels awful." Frank didn't reply. He placed the phone face down, the way he had with Lauren's message. He left it there, screen to wood, buzzing occasionally like a fly trapped under glass. Outside, the neighborhood filled with sound, mowers, sprinklers, children laughing. Flags fluttered. Cars slowed to admire houses decorated in stars and stripes. Frank's own home was unadorned this year. No banner. No grill smell. No coolers filled with drinks. He didn't even unlock the shed. Instead, he walked to his office and opened his filing cabinet. He began sorting. Not out of anger, not to retaliate, but to remember. To gather the fragments of what he'd given. Not just in money, but in hours. In sweat. In presence. He found photos from Matt's high school graduation, Nora holding his hand. Cards from Father's Days past, scribbled in crayon. Receipts from the first set of bunk beds he'd built for the grandkids. A life measured in pieces. He placed everything into a new folder. Not Matt and Lauren this time. He labeled it, with quiet, sharp precision. For myself. It was the first time in years he'd set aside anything with his own name on it. And as the light dimmed and fireworks cracked in the distance, Frank sat in his garage, not bitter, not broken. Just still. He had finally hit the bottom of something. And he was not afraid. By the morning of July 4th, Frank Delaney had made his decision. It came not with fanfare or fury, but with the soft snap of a manila folder being closed and the click of a desk drawer being locked. He showered, shaved, put on his old work shirt, pressed, buttoned, clean. The one Nora used to say made him look official. He moved around the house with a quiet rhythm, watering the garden, folding laundry, sweeping the porch he wouldn't decorate this year. Then he went back into the garage. The envelope printer groaned slightly as it came to life. Frank fed in a fresh ream of paper, He'd bought it months ago for a home office project Matt never finished. It felt appropriate now. He printed 12 copies. Each packet contained bank statements, every wire transfer, every mortgage payment, every automatic withdrawal he had set up on their behalf. Receipts, materials from hardware stores, online orders, handwritten invoices from contractors he'd paid quietly. Photographs, him on a ladder painting their second-floor trim, him laying stone in the backyard while Matt stood in a suit on a conference call, him at the grill, kids at his side, smiling under string lights he installed. Each packet began with a cover page. In case you've ever wondered who built this dream. 12 packets. One for every guest he knew would be there tonight. Lauren had posted the guest list on social media last week, a mix of her family, a few neighbors, and their close-knit circle of friends. The kind who complimented her on her eye for design, who never asked where the money came from, who assumed her lifestyle was organic and effortless. Frank packed the folders into a canvas bag. The same one he used to bring over hot dogs and paper plates. Then he sat down to write one letter. Not to Matt. Not to Lauren. To Grace and Henry. He folded it into 2 pages. Simple, clean language. He told them how much he loved them. How proud he was of their kindness, their laughter. How every sparkler they lit made him feel like the world was bright again. And then he said this. Someday, when you're older, you might hear different versions of how things happened. I don't need you to take sides. I only need you to know this: I showed up. Every time. Until I was told not to. He folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and wrote their names in black pen. He didn't know when he'd give it to them. But he would. At 6:15 p.m., he made himself a sandwich, sat at the kitchen table, and ate quietly. No music. No television. The neighborhood was alive with movement. Flags fluttered. The air smelled of smoke and spice. Children shrieked as sparklers hissed on driveways. At 6:45, he locked the house. Slid the bag over his shoulder. Got into his truck. He parked 2 streets away from Matt and Lauren's house. He knew the neighborhood well. He'd landscaped the front yards of half the block during the housing boom. From a distance, he could already see the party in full swing. Lawn chairs, string lights, soft music, the steady hum of voices trying to outdo each other in comfort and charm. Frank walked slowly, steadily. Not hunched. Not skulking. He walked like someone with nothing to hide and nothing to fear. He didn't ring the bell. He entered through the side gate, the same one he had installed after Lauren complained about backyard visibility. He passed the hydrangeas he planted last spring, the ones everyone said made the house look like something out of a magazine. Nobody noticed him at first. They were too busy posing for group selfies. Then someone looked up. Frank didn't smile. He simply reached into his bag and handed the first folder to a woman he vaguely recognized from previous holidays. She frowned, looked down, and began reading. Then he moved to the next person. And the next. He didn't speak. He just handed out the truth. By the time he reached Matt, half the guests were holding folders, flipping through pages with confusion, then recognition. The room's mood shifted. A ripple moved through the patio. Matt stood frozen, beer bottle in hand. "Dad, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice just above a whisper. Frank looked at him, calm, composed. "You forgot something, son." He held out the folder. Matt didn't take it right away. He just stared at it like it might burn him. Lauren was across the yard, whispering urgently to her mother, who now had one of the folders open in her lap. Her lips were pressed thin. Her eyes darted toward Frank like she'd seen a ghost. Frank gave Matt one final look, then turned around and walked back through the gate. He didn't wait to see what happened next. He didn't need to. He'd already said everything he needed to say. And not a single word had been spoken. The next morning, the sky was overcast, a rare softness in Spokane's July stretch of hard blue. Frank sat at his dining table, coffee in hand, not looking at his phone, though he knew it had already rung several times. He let it buzz. The call log was predictable. Matt, twice. Lauren, once. Unknown numbers, possibly her parents or a few of the party guests. He didn't listen to any of the voicemails. He didn't need to. He already knew what they would say, confusion draped in politeness, disapproval hidden beneath concern, apologies offered as bargaining chips. He opened his laptop instead. Typed in his bank's portal. Signed in. And without ceremony, without hesitation, he cancelled the monthly transfer to Matt's mortgage account. It had been running automatically for nearly 4 years. Every 15th of the month, $2,800 vanished from Frank's account. No reminders. No thank yous. Just subtraction. He stared at the cancellation confirmation for a few seconds. Then he exhaled slowly and closed the tab. It was done. Next, he pulled up a spreadsheet he'd started weeks ago, just after the first hints of Lauren's increasing distance, when he noticed his calls returned less often, his visits shortened. He had catalogued every financial contribution. Not just the big things, the down payment, the mortgage help, the kitchen remodel. But the little ones, back-to-school clothes he bought when money was tight, birthday party bounce houses, last-minute Uber rides, they'd pay him back for later. $127,000, all told. And that was a conservative count. Frank printed 2 copies, one for his files, one for his lawyer. He called Mark Brillman, his old friend and estate attorney. "Mark," he said plainly. "I want to update my will. Everything okay?" "Everything's finally clear." Frank made the appointment for the following Tuesday. Until then, he intended to let the silence do its work. The messages became more urgent by evening. "Dad, please, let's talk. I didn't know about the bank stuff. You should have told me if you were feeling unappreciated. We love you. That hasn't changed." But Frank didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, he went for a walk. Through the same park where he used to bring Grace and Henry to feed ducks. He passed the swing set he had fixed when the city hadn't gotten around to it, tightened bolts, oiled chains. No one ever knew he'd done it. That had been his whole life, really, fixing things no one noticed were broken until they stopped working. When he returned home, he pulled down a cardboard box from the top shelf in his closet. Inside were photo albums, letters from Nora, and a sealed envelope with her handwriting on the front. To be opened when you stop recognizing yourself. Frank had read it once before, about a year after she passed, when he thought grief would swallow him. It wasn't a goodbye letter. It was a reminder. Don't give more than you are. Don't empty yourself to fill someone else's life. You are not a utility. You are a whole human being. That night, he slept without checking his phone. The next day, he called the HOA office. "Hi, this is Frank Delaney. You have me listed as co-signer and emergency contact for the residents on Windmere Drive. I'd like that removed." A pause. "Oh. Are you sure, sir?" "I am. Please direct all future HOA concerns to Matthew Delaney or Lauren Ridgewell. I'm no longer financially or administratively responsible for that property." He hung up. It felt like snipping a cord that had been fraying for years. Throughout the week, he quietly removed himself from other things. He cancelled the Costco card Matt had been using. He unsubscribed from their Amazon Prime family plan. He transferred the cell phone line he'd been paying for back to Matt's name. Each act felt like a small reclamation of breath. Then came the email from Lauren. "Frank, what you did at the party, it was cruel. You embarrassed us. That's not what family does." He read it twice. Then deleted it. What he didn't do was respond. What he didn't do was explain himself. And that, he knew, would be the part that stayed with them the longest. They had never feared his anger, he'd never shown it. But his absence? That would echo. In the days that followed, the heat pressed down on Spokane like a wet towel. Fireworks were replaced with silence. But inside Matt and Lauren's house, the air turned heavy for a different reason. The silence from Frank was absolute. No returned calls. No text responses. No surprise visits to check the gutters or bring over batteries for the kids' toys. Just, nothing. Matt sat on the back porch on the morning of July 6th, phone in one hand, bank app open in the other. His jaw tightened. The mortgage draft hadn't gone through. He refreshed the screen. Still nothing. He checked the account twice more. The automatic payment his father had arranged, the one Matt had pretended not to think about, wasn't just delayed. It was gone. He called the bank. Waited through the hold music. A woman with a warm voice confirmed the account had been removed. No forwarding instructions. No replacement. Lauren found him there, brows furrowed, dressed still in silk loungewear. What's wrong? He handed her the phone. He stopped. Her face stiffened. What do you mean, stopped? The mortgage. It's not paid. Lauren blinked, processing. I thought that was just, continuing, she said quietly. Matt didn't respond. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived. Not from Frank, but from the HOA. It informed them that Matthew Delaney and Lauren Ridgewell were now solely responsible for all community dues and property obligations. Effective immediately. Lauren read the notice twice, then threw it onto the kitchen counter. This is spite, she hissed. No, Matt said, folding the paper carefully. It's clarity. The folders Frank had passed out at the party had done their work too. In the immediate aftermath, the guests had responded in whispers and texts. A few had replied that night, in private messages or emails. Didn't realize how much your dad helped you. That was eye-opening. Honestly, I thought your house came from her side of the family. The silence from Frank spoke louder than any confrontation could. People began pulling back. Politeness turned into guardedness. The image Lauren had spent years crafting, effortless, upward, graceful, began to crack. Matt's sister, whom they hadn't seen in years, called him late one evening. I saw the documents, she said gently. Is it true? Yes. And you let that happen to him? He didn't know what to say. The children began to ask questions, too. Grace asked where Grandpa was. Is he mad at me? Matt tried to explain. He's just taking some space. But even a 7-year-old could feel when someone's absence wasn't temporary. Frank's financial footprint had been everywhere, and as it receded, the family felt the impact in quiet, accumulating ways. The lawn service he'd prepaid for 6 months didn't renew. The handyman he'd recommended and usually tipped in advance stopped coming. The basement water heater issue that had been fine for now suddenly wasn't, and the $2,000 fix wasn't in the budget anymore. And all of it, every crack in the plaster, every late notice, every unfamiliar invoice, was a whisper of the man they dismissed. Lauren finally sent another email, longer this time. Carefully worded. Full of suggestion and apology. Frank, I know things were said that maybe we didn't handle gracefully. But family has always been important to you, and to us. The kids miss you. We'd like to find a way forward. Frank never replied. Instead, he mailed Grace and Henry's letter to their address, postmarked simply, with no return address. He didn't write a new note to Matt or Lauren. He didn't need to. Matt sat with the letter one afternoon after Grace read it aloud on the carpet. She didn't ask questions afterward. She just said, I want to send Grandpa a drawing. Matt nodded. But he didn't know where to send it. Frank had removed himself with precision, no bitterness, no mess. Just, exit. And the vacuum he left behind was louder than any fight could have been. It was 2 weeks after the 4th when Matt finally appeared. Frank was in his front yard, pruning the rosemary bush Nora had planted a decade before. The scent filled the summer air, earthy, calming, something like memory. He heard the crunch of tires on gravel and looked up to see Matt's car pulling into the drive. No one else was with him. No Lauren. No kids. That told Frank enough. Matt stepped out slowly, hands empty, shoulders slightly hunched like someone showing up at a door with no plan, just need. "Hey, Dad." Frank nodded. Said nothing. Matt glanced at the trimmed hedge. "Still keeping everything sharp, I see." Frank didn't smile. He clipped another sprig, placed it gently into a basket, and waited. I came to talk. If that's okay." Frank gestured toward the porch. Not warmly. Not coldly. Just open enough. They sat in the wooden chairs Frank had built himself years ago, ones Matt had never asked about, never commented on. They creaked under weight that had nothing to do with gravity. For a moment, they both looked out across the yard. The American flag fluttered quietly on the pole Frank had installed 2 days after the 4th. Not the one meant for Matt's house. A new one. Matt cleared his throat. "I didn't realize how much you'd done. For us. I mean. I knew pieces. But not like that." Frank didn't speak. "I let Lauren handle a lot of things. I thought," he paused, shook his head. "Honestly, I didn't think. I just assumed you were okay with it all. With helping." Frank finally turned his head, eyes steady. "Helping isn't the same as disappearing." Matt winced. "I never meant to erase you," he said. "But you did," Frank replied, voice low. "Bit by bit." Matt looked down at his hands, fidgeting. "I guess I thought love was enough." "No," Frank said quietly. "You thought I didn't need love. Just purpose." The silence settled between them. Not hostile. Just true. "I've been trying to figure out how to fix it," Matt said, almost in a whisper. Frank's eyes softened, just a little. "This isn't something you fix, son. It's something you respect." Matt blinked. "So you're not coming back?" "I didn't leave," Frank said. "You just stopped seeing me." There was no heat in the words. Just a calm, unshakable line drawn in the dirt. "I was trying to make things easier," Matt offered. "For who?" That stopped him cold. Frank leaned back slightly. "You're not a child anymore. I'm not a bank account. And I'm not your safety net. I'm a person, Matt. A man. A father who built your life so you could forget who built it." "I'm sorry." "I believe you," Frank said. "But that's not the point." Matt swallowed hard. "Can we start again?" Frank considered this for a long moment. Then he stood up slowly, walked to the edge of the porch, and looked out toward the road. The summer air carried distant laughter from another house down the block. He turned back. "You're welcome here. Anytime. On my porch. In my life. But you come as a man. Not a son asking to borrow a piece of me. Not someone who thinks I exist in the background." Matt stood too. His face was pale. But there was something else in his eyes now, clarity, perhaps. "I'll try." Frank nodded. "That's up to you." There was nothing else to say. Matt walked back to his car. He paused before opening the door, looking once more at the home he hadn't visited in months. Then he left. Frank watched the dust rise behind him, then disappear. Then he returned to his rosemary. The summer settled into its back half gently. In Spokane, that meant cooler mornings, and dusky evenings when the sun painted everything amber before dipping behind the hills. Frank found himself waking earlier. He didn't set alarms. Didn't check the time. He just rose with the light and the sound of birds gathering at the feeder he'd built last year and finally installed outside the kitchen window. His days took on a new rhythm, one not tethered to anyone's needs but his own. He joined a local workshop downtown that restored antique furniture. 3 times a week, he rode his bike there, slowly, steadily. He sanded tabletops worn by other people's stories, reassembled chairs that had been forgotten in basements. The shop was filled with quiet types. Men like him. Women who never rushed. They spoke little, worked deeply. No one asked what brought him there. And that, in itself, was peace. On Saturdays, he began volunteering at the community library, sorting old donation boxes, setting up reading circles for the children. Grace and Henry came once. Just once. Matt brought them by quietly, unannounced. Frank hadn't expected it. Grace had run up to him and hugged him so tightly it cracked something open inside him. "Did you get my drawing, Grandpa?" He had. It hung now on his refrigerator, crayon swirls, her name written backwards, a stick figure man holding a flag. Frank read to them that morning, "Blueberries for Sal," and when it ended, Matt didn't speak much. Just nodded, and quietly thanked him. Then he left with the kids. No promises. No declarations. Just a beginning. That evening, Frank sat on his back porch. He sipped iced tea from the glass Nora had loved. The new flagpole swayed gently in the wind, firm, clean, unyielding. He had installed it himself. No audience. No ceremony. It wasn't a statement for others. It was an answer to himself. He walked more now. Long evening strolls through the neighborhood, where neighbors stopped him to say they'd missed seeing him at the Delaney's 4th of July party. He would smile and say, "I was busy finding peace." It was the only explanation he needed. His home became his again, not a storage closet of other people's futures, but a sanctuary. He repainted the hallway. Restored Nora's old writing desk. Hung photos not of obligation, but of joy. There was one wall in the hallway now with only 3 frames, a black and white photo of him and Nora on their wedding day, a shot of him holding a newborn Matt, exhausted but beaming, and Grace's crayon drawing of the man with the flag. 3 generations. 3 truths. No illusions. One morning in early September, he found a small card in the mail. Handwritten. From Lauren. "Thank you for not raising your voice. I'm sorry it took us this long to hear you." Frank read it once. Then tucked it in the drawer beside the letter Nora had written, the one that had saved him. He didn't reply. Forgiveness wasn't owed. It was chosen. And he chose his peace. It was in the sound of sprinklers clicking on before dawn. In the hum of his circular saw as he shaped old wood into something beautiful again. In the laughter of children at the library, their voices rising and falling like memory without pain. It was in the absence of asking. The presence of being. He no longer built things to prove his worth. He built because it made him feel whole. On the first crisp morning of fall, Frank stepped onto his porch with a mug of fresh coffee and no particular plans for the day. The wind moved gently through the trees, rattling the leaves just enough to make him pause and listen. Not for a voice, not for a message. Just, listen. Across the street, a father lifted his daughter into the bed of a truck, adjusting her helmet for a bike ride. She laughed, unaware of how many kinds of fathers existed in the world. Frank smiled softly. The old flag waved behind him, catching the breeze like it understood something about endurance. There had been no explosion. No climactic redemption arc. Just a man who stopped giving himself away and, in doing so, discovered he hadn't lost everything. He had reclaimed something more valuable than legacy or recognition. He had reclaimed himself. And now, every morning was a declaration. Not loud. Not lit by fireworks. But steady. Present. Free.